in the first section of the book, the questions we pondered, we decided to really give you insight into the kinds of questions we asked each other and ask of ourselves as we were thinking about this book. And we started off with the biggest question, one that we found ourselves going back to time and time again: is reading still reading?
And this is one of the questions that emerged from the process of studying those novels that we had identified in the survey. As we read them again and again, we watched ourselves reading. And as we watched ourselves reading and our students, we began to think about the process and how it was changing over time. We realized that we were reading some of these books on a Kindle or on an iPad, and that was a slightly different process. And that got us to thinking about the sort of reading that we did on the web, when we would hit hyperlinks and bounce off into some totally different spot, and then either have to find our way back or decide we didn't want to go back. We simply wanted to go on to the next hyperlink and see where that took us.
Or if I can just jump in, we would be driving in a car and put on an audio tape, an audio book. And our question was constantly to each other, when you're listening to a book on tape, is that reading? You know, just exactly what is reading, and how is the understanding and the definition of reading changing in this 21st century world?
And as we read about reading, we heard the observations of a great many people who said that the web was changing the way we read. It was making us prefer the very short one-screen segment of text to the lengthy novel. Or even the lengthy article.
And at the same time, other people were arguing that actually, because of all the reading we're now doing, we as a nation and as a world on the web, while we might be leaning toward liking the shorter text, at some levels we're reading with more synthesis, with more evaluation, as we're deciding when to jump over to that other text, when to follow that hyperlink, and then how to take that new information and synthesize it into the world in which we're sitting with that primary text, and having to navigate scrolling text, visual images that appear, music that plays all the time, that in some ways reading has become more complex because more things are happening in a linear fashion. We're taking things in a much more holistic fashion. Do you want to say something else?
No, I was going to say simply that despite all of these evolutionary changes, we still go back to books often, or articles, or newspapers. We still go back to that linear text. There are some elements of reading that don't seem to have changed a great deal. So the question is, how do we deal with students in this world when reading is so many different things to so many different people?
So one of the things that we think is important about this first question, is reading still reading, is on page 14, where we give you that boxed item up at the top of the page that says a reading habits survey. First, this is a survey that we think you ought to take yourself and your colleagues in your school. Wouldn't it be interesting if you think reading is one thing and the teacher 4 doors down thinks it's something else? So start with this survey in your faculty so that together you can discuss what you think reading is. And then we slightly adapted it for students, and you can find that back in the appendix section. And like we mentioned earlier, you can also find it online. And we hope that you have a great time discussing in your school, is reading still reading? I'm Kylene Beers.
And I'm Bob Probst.